Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Harmony Insights lunch date. My name is Erich Kurschat. I'm the owner of Harmony Insights LLC, a company that allows me to work with organizations and consultants using the DISC personality assessment. I'm also the founder of the HR Hot Seat Mastermind community, which is an organization of over 2,500 members in 10 different licensed chapters around the country. And we bring HR professionals together to solve real HR problems. It's all being done for free and it's all online these days. So you can find out more about HR Hot Seat if you go to hrhotseat.com. For today's purposes, my lunch dates usually feature a guest who's come on to speak with me about something inspiring and actionable and timely. Today, we have the second ever pop-up panel. Some of you were involved with the first one that we had a couple of weeks ago, and it went really well. It was very well received. I got great feedback from people. Our inaugural panelists were Susan Barbie, Paul LaLonde, and Shandy Ewart, and we talked on the topic of meaningful connection. Just had a really good conversation. It was very well received, and people asked for it to happen again, wanted more time, and wanted more interaction with the panelists. And so both of those things are going to happen today. Instead of going from 12 to 12:30, we're going to go from 12 until 12:45. We will take a little bit more time. We're going to have a little bit more interaction as we go. The origin story of this, I will keep quick. Those of you familiar with the HR Hot Seat community know that we are based in several very strong beliefs, one of which is that everybody brings equally valuable perspective and experience to our conversation. So I was walking home from the grocery store at some point last year, and I thought, if we can be so successful as an HR mastermind organization based on that tenet, what else could we do? What else is possible? And I started thinking about my experience with panel discussions and how much I learned, certainly from subject matter experts, but how much I wish that more time was spent acknowledging the experience and perspective that audience members and other participants were bringing to that conversation. So not just the panelists, but everybody else who was in the room, who had such great perspective, again, to contribute to that conversation. And I thought, what if we attempted something called a pop-up panel, where we brought people together and decided in the moment, sort of randomly, who was going to participate as a panelist, and expect fantastic things from those panelists. Great input, inspiring contributions, enlightening experience, all of the things that you would expect from any panelists, but have them chosen on the spot from among your peers. And I wanted to call it a pop-up panel. So that's what we have today. Today's topic is going to be on leadership. Last time it was meaningful connection. This time is going to be on leadership. And our conversation today, just to make it clear, is based on a few assumptions that I had on the registration page. Number one, all people have equally valuable expertise, experience, and perspective to share. I think that's really important. Number two, all people are equally deserving of the spotlight, regardless of title, following, or bio, the things that usually get you picked for a panel discussion. And then lastly, all people benefit when they come together in support of and in service to one another. And that's this sense of community that I think is so important, especially right now when we are physically distanced, although hopefully that isn't going to last too much longer. We'll see how that goes. And the agenda for today is that pretty soon, not yet, I'm going to invite you, if you want to be a panelist, to make yourself known in the chat area. If you don't want to, and you're here just to be a fly on the wall and listen to others, you can certainly do that as well. But this only works if we have some people who are willing to serve as panelists. And when you do make yourself known or volunteer to be on the panel, hopefully you are also familiar with the three questions that I included and have prepared some thoughts on those three questions that I posted in the event description. I won't go over those now, but hopefully you've brought some thoughts. And so if you volunteer to be on the panel, that you've seen those questions and you have a sense of how you might respond to them. And a couple ground rules, as I put in the description. Number one, where do I have those? Why do I keep losing those ground rules? Oh yeah, any panelist who wishes to step down may do so at any time for any reason, no questions asked. That's really important to me. So if suddenly you're thinking, you know what, I don't need the spotlight, that's perfectly okay. No judgment there. And then two, just that there's no selling from the stage. So if you are chosen as a panelist, that it's not an opportunity to kind of push your own product or services, but rather just to contribute to a meaningful conversation today. We are going to start with a panel, which is going to go approximately until 12:30. And then at 12:30, we will, I'm going to mix it up a little bit and leave some time then for questions that go both ways. Questions being asked of the panelists, but then also I think it's really important for the panelists, should they so choose, to ask questions on the topic of leadership to our attendees and allow anybody else who is with us today to chime in. Because by then you will be certainly inspired and have thoughts of your own that you might like to share, even if you have not been selected as a panelist today. I think that's everything that I wanted to cover, and hopefully you're with me. I got to change my view so I can actually see some of you. That would be nice. All right, so this is what we're going to do now while I figure out how to see more of you. I would love for you to make yourself known in the chat area. Simply, if you want to be chosen as a panelist today, I'm going to choose 3 panelists, and I'm going to encourage those of you who are chosen as panelists to keep yourself muted in the meantime and unmute yourself when it is time to speak if you have some background noise. Otherwise, you can leave yourself unmuted. But at this point, if you are interested in volunteering as one of our pop-up panelists for today's conversation on the topic of leadership, and you've taken a look at those questions that are in the event description, put something in the chat area right now. And we'll give it a moment to see who pops up there. So our 2 panelists today are going to be Kyra Matkovich and Paul LaLonde. And I'm thrilled to have you both here. I'm still working on my end and trying to see the 2 of you. So I'll figure that out. I think if I can leave it on active speaker view, then that is going to work. So let's do that. All right. Kyra and Paul, I would love to hear from you first, who you are, just a quick introduction so that people have a sense of what you're bringing to this conversation. Paul, you want to start?
Sure. My name's Paul LaLonde. I am the HR director at CETA of Cook County in Chicago. We're a community action agency, which is a fancy term for a big nonprofit that does a lot of work in the low income and at-risk communities. So happy to be here, and there.
All right, we'll take it. Thank you. Nice purple wall behind you. I love it.
Oh.
Kyra. Kyra.
Hi.
Welcome.
And I apologize ahead of time. I've been having some buggy internet issues this week, so if I cut out,
that's all right.
Apologies. My name is Kyra Matkovich, and I'm a senior HR business partner for Exact Sciences in Madison, Wisconsin. And in that organization, I support the research and development function, as well as our pipeline, which is essentially a group of people who are working to determine needs in the market for early cancer diagnosis and diagnostics tools. And then I also support our business development and corporate strategy groups, and been in HR for 20 years, and the majority of my role is leadership development.
Wonderful. So that I think that positions you very well for this conversation today.
We'll see.
I'm counting on both of you. All right. I mean, this is a topic I think that never falls out of favor, and there's so much going on in the world today right now, and so many examples I think of both effective and ineffective leadership. So we should have plenty to talk about. And I have these 3 questions that I've kind of chosen, but I think we can go off script today if we are so moved. So Kyra, we'll start with you. How, if it's possible to define it, and sometimes it seems like it's less easy, how would you define leadership as a term?
Yeah, I mean, it is difficult to define. I think, when I think of leadership, it's really those roles that are in place in an organization to help support the success of others. And so that may mean removing obstacles. It may mean coaching through some challenges or mistakes or behavior, attitude issues, those types of things. But really, I feel that leaders are there to help the individual contributors, the teams, and the organization succeed.
And as soon as you respond that way, I think, you know, one of the topics that often comes up when we're defining leadership is leadership with a capital L, you know, versus leadership with a lowercase l. Is it your opinion that leadership sort of requires a certain level or title within an organization, or is leadership something that can be practiced at all levels of a company?
Yeah, so I think what you're talking about, there's formal leadership and informal leadership. And I'm a big proponent that just because you have leader in your title or you're in a position of leadership doesn't necessarily make you a leader. Yeah. I think we've all been in situations where people are, you know, we report to somebody, they're our leader, but they're not good at it. They fail regularly, miserably. And I think that, you know, really you can be a leader at any level of the organization. You could be, you know, whether that's your, you know, receptionist walking in the front door that works in the lobby, or it could be somebody that does have a pile of people underneath them that report up through them. It could be an individual contributor. There's lots of ways that you can lead.
Yeah, I very much agree. Thank you. Paul, what do you think? So Kyra is saying that leaders are people who have the ability to impact the lives and the careers of other people. How would your definition be similar or different to what we've heard already?
I agree, obviously, with a lot of what Kyra said. You have your formal leadership, the people that should be looked at in that role, and then you have the informal ones, who are the day-to-day folks who just kind of get that following. And I think that's the key word. To have a leader, you have to have people follow you. But even then, I guess not necessarily, because to me, I think a leader is a person that does the things that others won't do, that should be done, or is picking up the pieces that others just aren't doing for whatever reason. I think we all know those folks at times that keep everything running when everything else around them just isn't pulling their weight. Those folks are the leaders, and eventually they will get a following, and people will look to them and either inadvertently or explicitly do what they do.
I personally spend a lot of time with the DISC personality assessment, and in DISC terms, the work of leaders has to do with crafting a vision and aligning people with that vision and then executing on it. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's very easy to see how people at the executive levels of an organization are doing those things or not, but also how they can be done at really any other level of a company, regardless of title, as we've already been talking about. So I like the idea, Paul, that you put out there that that a leader has followers, that there are people that are being aligned in some way by that person. And if you are leading, or you call yourself a leader, and there aren't people that are following you, do either of you think that that's a reason for concern?
I would start, it would depend over a long time. I would say not necessarily, and that's why I kind of backed off a bit, because I was just thinking, just even in terms of today, we can look around us just this week at all the horrors that are going on in the country. But a leader is a person that steps up and says, this is wrong. And someone has to start there, even though the rest of the society or whoever may not be following right away. That leader steps up before anyone else does and says, just because there's a law backing this, or this is common practice, doesn't mean it's right. And they start stepping up. And sometimes that takes a long time for people to get on board with. So I think eventually over time, leaders, to be effective, need followers. Maybe that's the caveat, but you don't have to be necessarily have a mass following right away to be a really good thought leader. So
I like that. That's a great example. That really helps put into perspective for me, because in the beginning I was thinking, well, maybe a leader does need followers, but I think you made an excellent point for how a leader may not right off the bat, at least, but still be a role model in some ways. Kyra, question number 2 that I have is, what is a specific example of when you have personally struggled to lead others, and what did you learn from that experience? Does anything come to mind? You're laughing.
I don't know that I could think of anything specifically. I mean, I feel like it's a struggle all the time. It really comes down to individuals and maybe the dynamic of a team. There are some people that are just really easy to lead. You have great rapport with them. There's trust, there's openness, you provide each other feedback, it's give and take. And then there's other personalities maybe that are much more difficult. They're not as open to feedback or guidance, coaching. They think they have all the answers. Maybe there's some stubbornness. It could be arrogance or narcissism. Sometimes it's just a lot of what I see really for the people who are more difficult to coach. They're not, what's the word I'm thinking of? They don't intend to not listen. It's just sometimes they're really insecure. And so I find that I have to kind of massage that relationship and create a really strong trust in order to inspire them or motivate them to, really listen to the feedback that may be something that's preventing them from being, from being successful, or maybe there's an attitude that's affecting the team, and no one is really stepping up and providing that feedback, or maybe they have and they've exhausted all possibilities and in being able to communicate that to them. So to me, it's kind of an ebb and flow. I feel like there's times where you're humming along and everything's awesome, and then something happens and it's really a challenging situation, or it's a challenging person. So yeah, I can't think of anything specific other than, early in my career, where I just didn't have enough experience to deal with the really difficult kind of personalities, and I had to learn that sometimes the hard way.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Paul, from your perspective, Kyra was focusing a little bit more on the motivations of the people that she has led previously. And, we both know that we all know that there are two sides to every relationship. There are the people that we're leading, and then there are who we are as leaders. From your perspective, how would you describe the challenges that you have faced, specifically related to what you have brought to that equation?
I was thinking a little bit about it, and from my perspective, it's challenging for me to, tell people what to do, and that may be the wrong way of saying it, but some people, that's just how they want to be led, just tell me what to do.
Yeah.
And I have a very hard time doing that because I'm very laissez-faire. I'm very hands-off. I want people to own their role and to get into it. And it's been challenging for me to realize that not everybody can be led like that. And even when people prefer to have a hands-off approach to the way they're doing their work, you have to know when to step in and say, no, that's not where we need to be going. I need to have a little bit more hands-on work with you. And that's challenging for me. So I think just adapting your role and just saying is important to learn. And on top of that, it popped in my head as well that sometimes you have to lead leaders, which to me is also very challenging because, a CEO, if they're doing the right thing, they hire you and then they tell me what to do. I put you in this place because I'm not an expert in HR, or I'm not an expert in finances. I'm the CEO. So trying to lead somebody out of position for me is challenging at times, because I guess in theory I like sort of flat structure, but in reality, when you know, when the CEO walks in the room, things just change, you know, they just do, no matter what anybody else says. So me trying to go, oh, me telling the CEO something, should I be telling him what he wants to hear or telling him what he needs to hear, and how will he react to that? So leading the leader sometimes is a challenge too.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we've spent so much time focused on people who are, that we've been put in charge of, or who have been put in our charge. But this whole idea of managing up and saying, oh, wait a minute, you know, how can I be influential to folks who I'm reporting to can be certainly tricky. For me, along the way, I struggled to lead until I got to the point that I realized that different people want to be led in different ways. You know, that number one, there are different leadership styles. So that alone was enough to blow my mind, because I was familiar with my own and had to learn about other styles that existed. But then two, because it is a dialogue, you know, is the style that I'm bringing to this conversation appropriate for this particular person? Is there something else, a different style that would resonate better with this person in particular? Part of that was understanding my tendencies, what I'm capable of, but another piece of that was understanding other people and what they brought to the relationship. And that alone is enough to just, you know, keep you busy for the rest of your career. But I think when I got to the point when I could begin to at least understand those differences and appreciate and respect those differences, both in leadership style and in learning style or communication style on the part of the people being led, I think doors started to open up. I started to feel a little bit more confident. Have either of you found similar solace in sort of enhancing your own self-awareness about what you're bringing to the equation, and also having a sense of how different people want to be led?
Yeah, for sure. In my case, I think I spent a lot of time really learning what other people are looking for or what they need. And again, that is a lot of that give and take and rapport building, relationship building, trust building, so that I can, you know, come alongside them in the best possible way to guide or coach or, you know, remove obstacles, whatever it is. And certainly there's times where that stretches me and challenges me, because it's either new or it's just not a muscle that it's not comfortable for me. One of the things I was going to say though is, you know, I can think of, there's the senior leaders are actually the ones that I really enjoy doing development with the most, with the caveat that if they're open to that feedback. And one example of that is, I have a senior leader that I work with that every time we come together for our we have a one-on-one every week. But I would say every 2 or 3 months, we have an opportunity to spend, you know, a couple of hours together. And it's an opportunity for us to check in with each other. How am I doing? What feedback do you have for me? And I love those conversations, because they're so, I mean, we're both so eager to get that feedback, where it's like, I know that there's observations that he can share with me that will help me in the way that I'm coaching others, or the way that I walk into a room, or the way that I'm, you know, communicating through emails. Or whatever, and he's so eager for it as well. Like, what observations do you have for me today that will help me be a better leader for my people? And it's so exciting to have that kind of give and take, and you know, that's when it makes it really fun. If you're working with senior leaders who are not interested in the feedback, they don't want to hear it, they think they've got it all together, like, this is the way it's going to be, it's my way or the highway, that's not fun. That's a dictatorship.
Yeah, right. That two-way street. If people, as we're talking, if you're inspired by this conversation and you have thoughts to share of your own experiences, certainly include those in the chat area. We'd love to see those, and perhaps you'll have a chance to share them with our panelists in just a moment here. I want to move on to our final question, just given that we are at about 12:30 Central Time. And that question is, what is one piece of advice that you have for others who strive to lead more effectively? Something that is actionable that people can start practicing immediately following this conversation. Who would like to begin?
I'm happy to, if Paul looks like he's thinking. The one piece of advice that I would give is and it's directly out of the book, Radical Candor, is a go-to question. Ask for criticism. Have a go-to question where it opens the door for people to provide you with feedback on how you're doing and what you can do differently to help you be a better leader.
I love that.
Asking for criticism is big.
It makes me think of a word that comes up often in my Harmony Insights lunch dates, which is vulnerability. That you have to be willing to hear whatever. Number one, ask for it. And I think that there's so much strength in just asking for that feedback rather than just sort of leading from a distance and say, okay, you do this. That's kind of delegation, right? You do this, and then we'll check in at the end of the day. But true leadership, because it's a dialogue, I think requires to some extent this vulnerability that you're sort of implying, where number one, you have the strength to ask for the feedback, and then two, actively listen to it. And then maybe three, act upon it, like embrace and act upon it in some way.
Yeah, and reward the candor, right? Like if
Right.
you are asking for feedback, and it may be very uncomfortable for somebody to provide you with that feedback, reward them for that. Thank them for that. Don't argue with them. Don't give them excuses or try to explain things or whatever. Just, sit in the discomfort of whatever it is that they're sharing with you, and then thank them for it.
Yeah, that's great. I love the tip. Paul, what do you think?
Thing that kind of popped in my mind was this. There's a book by
Paul, I think we may have lost your audio. I don't know if other people are hearing that as well, but no. Your audio is out. Let's try it again. I don't feel like you touched your computer, so.
I didn't touch.
Okay, I think we're hearing you now.
You're back.
There?
Yeah.
Maybe pause. Oh, okay.
There we
Well, sorry about that. I was just saying there's a book by Ryan Holiday called Ego is the Enemy. And I think that speaks true. And it kind of touches upon what Kyra said, but can be expanded on that. If you think you know everything, then it's already kind of too late. I can't remember the exact phrase, but it's impossible to learn what you think you already know, kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. So just remain humble, and people will take notice of that. So just remember, ego is the enemy. Just you're not as smart, you're not as talented as you think you are. But then, don't let that go too far and think that you're not as talented or not as smart as you really are. So it's striking a balance.
Yeah. I had a great lunch date yesterday with a woman named Kelly Amadei from Spark Shift, I want to say. now suddenly I'm blanking on the name. Anyway, she's an executive coach and facilitates workshops. And we were talking, among other things, about leadership and being okay with not knowing and the vulnerability that goes into that. And that, as soon as you show up and purport to have all of the answers, you're setting up, you're building a wall, you're shutting other people down and saying, I have no room to grow as a leader. You have nothing to contribute to this conversation. I know what's right and you don't. And it shuts down conversation and dialogue, period, which is what leaders want to open up and promote and facilitate, is this back and forth, this dialogue, so that both sides continue to learn. So I like that. Ryan Holiday, you said ego is the enemy. Mm-hmm. Excellent. All right. So we've gotten through my questions at this point, and I appreciate the answers that we've gotten from both of our panelists. I would love to open it up, as you requested after the first pop-up panel, to open this up a little bit for more interaction. At this point, at least in terms of Zoom, I like to hover over the top right corner of my screen and click on gallery view so that I can see everybody who's with us today. And I would love to have two things. Number one, I'd love my two panelists to consider a question related to leadership that you would like to ask our audience, right? Anybody can chime in. So think of that. In the meantime, I will start by asking our audience, since you've been so quiet and so polite this entire conversation, what questions do you have for either of our panelists today? Simply unmute yourself to ask. Hannah, I saw you unmute yourself.
Sure. So I'm not sure exactly inspired, but I wonder if there's too much emphasis on leadership. Like the market is almost saturated with qualities of leaders and what makes a good leader and how to be a better leader. And gosh, I was trying to phrase this into a question. I mean, do you kind of almost agree? Is there too much emphasis on leadership at this kind of moment? I mean, we need more followers than leaders, I think, possibly. I don't know. You can disagree.
I think that's a great question. By the way, Hannah chimed in earlier. She is also from Wisconsin, but at this point not living anywhere near Wisconsin. Where are you,
No, I'm
Hannah?
living in Finland, Helsinki now.
Hannah's in Helsinki, Finland, but we had a great back and forth recently on LinkedIn about Wisconsin beers.
It's 8 p.m. here. Sorry.
Nice. Jealous.
Love it. Kyra or Paul, what are your thoughts on that? Are we talking too much about leadership these days?
I think that's fascinating to think about, but also probably points to the fact that maybe there isn't enough leadership, or it's not being shown enough, that if we have to keep talking about it, that something is missing in there a little bit. So I usually find that the more saturated something is, the more people are craving to know about it, and it's missing. So maybe that's just maybe a telltale sign, but I hear you that at some point I would love to not have to talk about leadership. That means that we've mastered it, but I don't know what Kyra thinks.
I understand.
Yeah, Paul, I would agree with you. I think that especially right now, I mean, we need leaders to step up, and you know, if there's not a leader, and whether that's somebody in a formal leadership position or somebody who's kind of rising to the challenge to help organizations navigate through this time, if somebody's not leading that, everything falls flat, and it can get really messy really quickly. So I think that, you know, the emphasis on leadership is really more about what are we doing about it, and are we effectively developing our leaders? Or are we just talking about leadership like it's because it's a cool buzzword and it sounds fun and we can create trainings and send our people to leadership training, but it doesn't actually change their behavior or their decision making or something like that. And so I think it's really more about, less about talking about it and more about action. What are we doing differently to become better leaders? Or are we just talking about it because, you know, it sounds fun?
I think you phrased it better than I did. I think I was concerned of it becoming like a buzzword and the trainings and something to sell. You know, I think that's how I feel about whenever I hear leadership. I almost cringe now when I hear.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting that you say that. So several years ago, I was working for an organization, and it was right about this time when like leadership was becoming the thing. There were leadership books, there was leadership training, universities were creating leadership degrees, organizational leadership, and it just became this whole thing, like leaders. We're going to go to leadership training. We're going to be leaders, and sitting in that organization, watching all of this unfold in front of me, and really not a one of them or stepping up and actually leading. And so I landed in the same place that you are now, where it's like, oh, I hate the word leader. I hate the fact that we're even talking about leadership training, you know, organizational leadership degrees, you know, but things have changed over the years. And really that was, I think, a reflection of that particular organization and their approach to leadership, and they fell in that category of just talking about it and not really understanding what impact they could have on people and what changes needed to be made in order to really to actually lead people, not just use the word leader, but what do I need to do today that would help me be an effective leader, that would help our people be successful in their roles? To you know, do we have the right people in those roles? Are we asking the right questions for our business? You know, what decisions are we making that are positioning our business for today and for the future, and not just, you know, sitting back and letting things go idle by.
That's a great question. Great answers. From my own perspective, I feel like there are always going to be people talking about it because that's their area of expertise. So you're always going to see LinkedIn articles, et cetera, and posts from people who really know what they're talking about in that arena. And then in terms of the general population, it may die down a little bit until someone that we deem to be a leader either does something extraordinary well or something very dumb. And it could be at a corporate level, it could be in the government. I mean, it's and then all of a sudden everyone's talking about it again. Well, this is how it could have been done better. This is a fantastic example of how to lead and how it's done well. And then suddenly there's this buzz around it, and it'll die off again until the next fantastic or horrible thing pops up as a headline. So I don't know that it's a term we're going to shake anytime soon. Another question for Kyra or Paul.
This is Hema. I don't have a question as much as, I think one of the big things that we tend to find is that people read all of these leadership books and they think just like that, I'm a leader because I've read, if I do A, I'm a leader. I don't think people spend enough time defining what leadership means to them and what their own traits in leadership are, regardless of position. I also feel like it's sometimes certain books and articles and trainings, and even if you think about it, for emerging leaders programs, right, that many organizations have. It's kind of like this elite group. You're chosen to be a leader. And the truth is, leadership is attainable to everybody, and it's about the everyday leader and not just the leader by title, which both of the panelists talked about, or those tapped on the shoulder to lead. So I think that a piece of, and to the question we just had previously too, I think the buzzword piece of it is also about not knowing what leadership means to us individually.
I like that. So rather than there being this universal definition, how are we defining it for ourselves in a way that's meaningful? Kyra, Paul, any reactions to what Hema has said?
I think it would, and I keep saying pop in my head, that's just kind of what happens, pop-up panel pops. I think people, and kind of to piggyback off what Hema said, people need to find leadership at where they're at, and also realize that leadership can be found in places, or learning how to be a leader can be found in places that don't have leadership in the title. I mean, I'm a big believer in reading as much as you can and applying those things in unorthodox ways that you wouldn't have thought would have applied. And I'm struggling right now to think of an example, but it would come to, well, I guess one real quick example was, it may not be 100% on leadership, but Thich Nhat Hanh is an internationally known Zen Buddhist leader. He wrote a book called Living Buddha, Living Christ, and he spent part of his life, this Zen Buddhist, studying Christianity. And he said studying that made him a better Buddhist. So it's just those type of things. And that, again, that might not be an example on leadership per se, but it's reading things in a different way to make you better at where you're at.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, there were a couple of comments that I wanted to make on that. Hema made an important point about, reading books or going to training or whatever, but it doesn't always necessarily change anything. And so I think, when you're looking at whether it's emerging leader programs or any kind of leadership development program, we always kind of subscribe to this 70-20-10 model, which only 10% of the way that we learn actually comes from reading something or attending a class or a conference or seminar, webinar, whatever. 20% comes through that feedback kind of model, guidance, mentorship, almost conversational. 70% of what we learn is actually doing what we learn. And so it's so important that if you are reading a book or you go to a conference, attend a seminar, doing anything to develop your leadership, that you find ways. What are your takeaways? What are the things that you can do right away, that you can implement and execute right away, that can help you become, a better leader based on the information that you were provided. And so like in our organization, our leadership programs follow that 70-20-10 model, where it's like, okay, we're giving you a class, but here are the things that you can do to practice so that you're actually learning these things. Because what'll end up happening, you go to the conference, you don't use it, you lose it. And what a waste of time for everybody. The other thing is, often in my experience, the informal leaders, those leaders that are not leaders by title, they don't necessarily have direct reports, they're not senior into the organization, but often those individuals are the most influential. And so to me, they are leaders. People are listening to them. People respect them. They look at them as whether they're a subject matter expert or somebody that they trust because, you know, years of experience or their behavior warrants that. And so from a leadership perspective, it's really even chatting with those people. What is it that they're doing that is so influential and so impactful? And we can learn from that. You know, those are leadership qualities.
Wonderful. I appreciate both of those responses. And Hema, those were great thoughts as well. I appreciate you contributing those. We are already at 12:45, and I need to bring this to a close. I want to respect everybody's time. I promised Kyra and Paul the opportunity to ask a question of the audience. Do either of you have a single question that you want to pose to the audience for quick feedback?
I don't, not right now.
Okay. Kyra, did you think of one?
I did think of one, and you know, I don't know if it's really one that can be answered right here, but it's really more maybe for you to think about later. And that is, what are your biggest leadership challenges personally? And what are some of the things that you can do to start addressing those to help you become a better leader?
I think that's an excellent question. And Danielle has already kind of asked that in the chat. She's saying, how do you balance your leadership responsibilities and your own work? So one of her personal challenges is finding that balance. You know, maybe she sees them as separate things. Maybe they're the same thing. Maybe it's just a matter of perspective. But I think finding that balance and figuring out how leadership applies to the work that you do. Maybe it is the work that you do and you never realized it, you know, because your job description bullets very different things, you know, but I think that's a great rhetorical question. We'll leave it there for now because, again, I don't want to keep people much longer than I promised. First of all, my thanks to our panelists today, Paul LaLonde and Kyra Matkovich. People can applaud, even though it's muted. Also, I want to say, if this is something that you enjoyed, let me know, Erich, E-R-I-C-H, at harmonyinsights.com. You can give me your feedback. Let me know what we might need to change going forward. People who know me know that I act on feedback. I make enhancements based on what I hear back from people. So let me know what you think about this. If you loved it, I would love for you to share harmonyinsights.com/lunchdates with your network, LinkedIn included. You know, we have a couple of great conversations coming up next week. Brandon Murphy from Lucas James Talent Partners on Tuesday is going to be talking about his recent shift in perspective on how we need to give first and how important it is to be giving to other people. And then Kate Seworth from Launchways on Thursday is going to be talking about how important it is to connect personally with people, to be human, and the impact that that has on both relationships and business. So those are going to be two great conversations on the topic, more or less, of connection, which has been such a theme in these lunch dates. I let my guests choose, and time again, people are choosing something related to meaningful connection, which I think really says something about where we are right now. Something I'm super excited about, I just announced June 18th. Show of hands, do people know who Steve Brown is? Steve Brown is the VP of HR for La Rosa's Pizzeria based in Ohio. He's very active with SHRM, gets in front of thousands of people at a time when he's on stage. He agreed to join me, of all people, for a Harmony Insights lunch date, and spots are going fast. I think we're going to reach our maximum capacity on Zoom for 100 people. That's coming up on June 18th. If you want to join us for that conversation, I would recommend registering sooner rather than later. In the meantime, I really appreciate you all being a part of this. It's an ongoing series. It's kind of an ongoing experiment, but I think if I've learned anything, it's that people really crave this sort of inspiring, actionable conversation. So I'm going to continue to host these. I hope you will continue to show up for them and share your enthusiasm about them on LinkedIn and other platforms. In the meantime, have a wonderful afternoon. Stay healthy, stay encouraged, and thanks again to our panelists, Kyra and Paul. I'll be seeing you all again really soon, I hope. Bye, everyone.